Hey gang, Shane Patrick White here, and welcome to Beyond the Process. Today I've spent the last 24 hours learning the ins and outs of Rebelle 7, a paint program from Escape Motions. My co-host, Lance Laspina, has gone on and on about this program. I'm primarily a traditional artist, and my biggest gripe with digital paint programs is that the color engine is usually terrible. So join me as I explore Rebelle 7 and what it has to offer as I navigate brush sets and manage to knock out a few illustrations along the way. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the process. I downloaded the free trial of Rebelle 7 Pro because I wanted the full experience. It automatically loads the textured watercolor paper. I chose the acrylic and oil brush set, which is the first one on the left. It has a wide range of brush sets, including round, flat, knife, grunge, rake, dabber, and metallic. I wanted to pick colors that have a high saturation and could mix well to make other highly saturated colors. These just happen to be magenta, yellow, and something like a cyan cobalt. The aqua is fun as it makes a rich green and when mixed with magenta and uncommon purple. I also wanted to see if I could mix a neutral gray using complementary colors like this permanent green and magenta. Because the colors weren't mixing with the first brush setting, I chose a mixing brush to do the job. The color black gets a bad rap, but some of the best colors that can be mixed with black are magenta and yellow. You can get an amazing purple and rich, warm green. And as you can see, they're really punchy colors. So far, it's a pretty good color engine. The next brush is the Express Oils. The editable set includes round, glaze, flat, and grunge. By mixing colors, I can see whether or not the color engine will gray out the results, which isn't very good if you want strong color choices. As you can see, these are pretty good considering I didn't use the strongest colors like I did in the last example. But I wanted to see what the oils could do. I chose the liner brush to quickly rough in a face. This brush feels pretty good. With more pressure on the brush, its on-screen reticule actually scales and you can adjust the pressure sensitivity as needed. To block in the big color shapes, I use a dry knife under the flat folder. One of the things when you're working with oils is the amount of oiliness or how things blend together. And as you can see, things are blending pretty well. By roughing colors in, I can then adjust lights and darks. I can use an eraser to cut back into the painting. Under the brush controls, using the number keys from 1 to 5, I can choose Paint, Paint and Blend, Blend, and Erase with the same brush texture. I move on to the watercolor brush, which has gouache, sumi, spatter, and granulation presets. I just want to see how the watercolor controls work. On programs like Painter, the watercolor feature always bogged down my system, forcing it to crash regardless of how jacked up the memory was. This is not the case. The colors bleed into each other like normal watercolors. They pause with every stroke. The gouache is amazing. You can vary how much water to use and how much opacity, which is pretty key to making gouache work in real life. I should add this is an 8.5 by 11 300 dpi file, so it's pretty big. Next I move on to inks. The only brush presets are pen and brush. I would have expected a sumi brush in here, but it's not the case. Being a comic artist, it's important to be able to ink when I need to. So I use the default bullet brush to draw out this robot head. Then I use brush 3 to fill it. The properties of the inks are curious. They seem to get darker and more opaque when you keep brushing over the same area. I'm not sure I like this at all. It's kind of annoying. As you can see, the ink, like the gouache and watercolor, also bleed together. The colors, however, do remain bright and pure. I'm not sure it would be a great finishing tool unless I really got used to it and took the time to get to know it. But in the time I had, this is what I came up with, and I don't know. I wasn't terribly impressed with this part of the program. Because I color comics digitally, I wanted to get a sense of how the lasso and fill tools work. Unlike Photoshop, you can't hold down the Alt key and turn the freeform drawing selection to a polygonal selection on the fly. That's incredibly annoying. If you hit L, it'll bring up the fill tool, which seemed super convenient and fast. I did, however, find an ink brush that I enjoyed to work with. It was brush number 2. You can see by the line smoothing panel I can adjust the pressure and smoothing for pulling long, steady lines. But for a look, this is actually a really nice look in terms of if you wanted a rougher, crime style noir comic. As for comic coloring, it's okay, but Photoshop is still better. The pencil tool has a graphite pencil, colored pencil, charcoal, digital, dry media, and scratches preset. I wanted to get in here and see what I could get out of the Craft Flat 2 brush. I like that it picks up the paper texture, but there's a hard edge along every stroke, and I wish I could blend it better. The tool is pretty fun and it feels good. Makes me wish there was an iPad version available for those who like to go to figure drawing sessions and draw digitally. I don't really use pastels in my traditional art, but these look pretty authentic in how they lay down on textured paper. The brush sets include pastel dry, pastel oil, textures, and scrape. When I lay the purple in, you can see how the oil builds up in streaks, like in real life. I wanted to try the texture in scrape brushes to see how they react to the substrate. Even when I change the substrate properties, it retains the previous texture, which is pretty cool. Markers are one of the few tools in all digital programs that I don't like one bit. I have much better control over them in real life than I did in Rebelle 7. Primarily, no matter what color you select or how light you go, the color buildup always gets darker than the actual color choice. It's not a good translation. I did try some of the marquee tools, which worked pretty well. I did use the airbrush tool just as an effects thing, because I don't really paint with the airbrush tool. It's mostly a supplemental thing. So for practical purposes, I thought it would be important to try a couple pieces from beginning to end. So I roughed out this Captain America piece in blue line, put it on a separate layer, and then went back into it using a pencil. Preferably the colored pencil, because the regular pencil always defaults to a gray as opposed to a black. Now the pencil tool worked pretty well. It felt really pretty natural, but it's hard to beat Clip Studio's pencils. And the fact that you can use it on iPad is even better. I wouldn't say this is exactly like the way I pencil traditionally, but it's pretty close. I also went in and decided, you know what, I may as well ink this piece and see if I can duplicate my inking style. The problem was the ink tool, I could never quite get it to look the right way. I duplicated the bullet brush and tried to make it sharper and refined and in the brush manager, but I just couldn't make it work. I also was using too much water. There shouldn't have been any water in here, and eventually I figured that out, but it didn't make the tool any better. In the end, it just ended up feeling like I was inking with a felt tip marker or some craft store special. It was not practical at all. I would never use this for inking comics unless I don't know, unless I built a brush from scratch, and even then I was kind of dubious about it. Again, Clip Studio is still the prime leader when it comes to inking comics digitally. It also depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do very clean art versus something sketchy or more textured, like in the earlier example. I mean, you can see right here, it's just these really thick gross looking lines. And granted, this is more of a classic comic book approach, not the newer, cleaner, slicker style that has become the cause de rigueur. But we try and adapt as we can to whatever tool is given to us. And I'm sure with enough time and practice I could get a look that would be decent, but this is not something I would recommend myself to use in the future. What was cool is the ellipse tools and the ruling tools. They're very, very good. They're as good perhaps as Sketchbook Pro. But I only use the ellipse tool. And what's cool is that I can do, you know, wheels or machines or any number of parts, and it's so much easier than Clip Studio. Clip Studio still needs to work on their guide system. It's just too convoluted and not fun at all. And then I tried the Hulk. I decided I was going to use the flat graphite brush and rough out the Hulk, fill the color in, which is pretty simple. It's green, obviously. And then paint over the top of both of those layers using an Expressive oil brush. What I liked about this is how well it blended. I was using the paint blend setting for the brush and it felt really good. I was able to quickly get the value structures locked in and the color moving around, and so that was a lot of fun. I'm sure if the piece was more complicated or there was more detail, it would be a very different story, and I just didn't have that kind of time. I didn't want to spend any more than, say, 24 hours evaluating this tool. Even though the trial version is allowed 30 days, I think, from when you sign up to when you download it. And I think it retails for something around 120, something like that. But I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I still have maybe 20 more days, 16 more days left. Maybe I'll be convinced. What's nice is I could also vary up the tools in terms of trying to get details. So you wouldn't necessarily use an oily brush to get details. You might use that for bigger areas. And lastly, I decided to try Iron Man, one of the third Avengers. In this example, I wanted to go and use all the tools that I had used up to this point. I wanted to see how they all work together and if I could own them in the sense of, can I make them work for me based on what I've learned about them? Because each tool has its own style, its own way of working. So I went in with a knife brush and blocked in all the biggest shapes. And that's usually how I work, you know, when it comes to painting. I block in, once I get the drawing down, I block in the biggest shapes, and then I start working in the shadow areas and start building and refining those areas and those passages to see how they relate to each other. I try to find color relationships. I look for edges, I squint for value, and then I work out the details at the end, highlights and any edges that I want to pop out more. In this case, I'm basically using the Expressive oil brush mainly, but going back and forth between liner brushes and mop brushes and trying to bring out highlights. And then I'll keep refining and refining until things tighten up, start looking a lot better. I decided to go with a complementary color scheme with the aqua and the red. Using the liner brush, I went back in with some of the highlights and detail work in terms of like the eyes and the edging. And then I remembered my original drawing, which I kind of liked, had this energy coming out of his eyes from both the left and right. I even used the airbrush tool to go in and push some things. And finally, I landed back on the colored pencil tool to fix any edges, and to also move things around, you know, to give it more of an illustrative kind of feel. So, will I buy Rebelle 7? I don't think so. While it's a lot of fun to play with, and the robust color engine is very attractive, the tool sets are mildly so. I'm not sure I have a practical use for them in my concept and storyboard work that I can't get elsewhere. Though, we'll see. I love color a lot, and maybe at some point I'll revisit it. For now, I'm going to go back to painting traditionally. Thanks again for joining me today. If you found any value in this, hit the like button. Better yet, subscribe or tell a friend. Until next time, thanks for watching.